Okay, show captions. Okay, I think I'm combobulated now. So good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all. As you all probably noticed, we were just kibitzing a bit before the meeting instead of after the meeting. Um, so just a couple of quick things, and then we'll just jump right into it. I don't have a scheduled presentation this morning, but Randy Leaning here is saying he's got lots of stuff to tell us. So he's going to be the dog and pony show this morning. um, so just a quick announcement before I forget while you're all still here. Um, so my travel plans are we will actually be leaving the end of this month on the 28th, which is a Thursday. So there will be no meeting on the 28th, and I will send that note out. And if I have it on the calendar, I will remove that meeting announcement. But just wanted to let you know that. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started. We have anybody new this morning? Anybody new to joining us this morning? I don't think so. So with that, Randy, if you want to just go ahead and uh, do your dog and pony show, we'd be grateful to hear all the updates of what's going on these days.
Okay, good. Okay. So this is just, it's interesting. Some weeks, there's relatively little, and other weeks there's an explosion of news items. And so this past week was the latter. Um, so several things that are happening sort of at
Excuse me, Randy, could you introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Randy Leaning, broadbandtoolkit.com, and we do analytics software and do gap analysis and help communities figure out what's going on in the broadband space and also help investors figure out where to put money into infrastructure. And part of that is sort of tracking to some extent, all of the sort of the legislative uh, dimensions. Um, so just the things that are have been transpiring this week. The FCC has an initiative on data collection, and so they've released a sort of a draft NPRM, and there's also a a report by the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. Kind of servicing a lot of the data collection issues. So to me, it's a big deal. And they and most such documents, it gets published in the Federal Register, and then it'll trigger a comment period. And I don't have the exact timing of that, but it's coming soon. And I'll drop a whole series of links into the chat on that topic. But that's for anyone who cares about kind of quality of data and data collection and what's available and how the various government entities participate. That's a big deal. Separately, in the FCC's May meeting, there's going to be discussion of high cost programs, and this includes things like the need for high cost funding, and for OpEx versus CapEx, and their whole litany of things. And again, I've got several links that I can drop in there. Um,
Randy, can you explain a little bit what those terms are that you just mentioned?
you
OpEx.
bet. Okay, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So basically, there are let's see, and I'm just gonna I actually have some notes on it. So the Universal Service Fund in particular, funds things like E-rate and Lifeline and rural healthcare. They also have what's called a high cost program, such as the Connect America, and basically they provide ongoing subsidies to operators in that are considered high cost areas. Basically they're very rural areas, and so this is something that in a lot of the congressional testimony just in the last year, operators come forth and say, and often say, don't cut this funding because it's really, really important. So there's a whole. I think right now this is what the FCC is envisioning is would sort of include USF, but it's much bigger than that. But it's really sort of more broadly just the need for for this category of funding, and it's something that has historically existed. And I guess in things like BEAD, people say, well, put up satellite, and you don't need, actually high cost funding is important to a lot of rural operators. And then OpEx versus CapEx, in any kind of business case, you've got your capital expenditure, which is with fiber, huge chunks of money that you expend upfront, and then your operating expenses, just your month-to-month cash flows. And in as a philosophy of subsidizing operators, there's some programs that are OpEx oriented, and RDOF is as an example of that, and then others that are CapEx oriented like BEAD. And so they're two different philosophies of how you uh, help fund organizations. So those were two, and I've got some links that I'll drop in after I talk on each of these. A third thing that's really also significant is there was a webinar yesterday put on by Shelby on sort of the litigation around the Universal Service Fund, and this is a really this is a topic with a lot of dimensionality. So the USF basically imposes a tax on telephony that pays for a whole bunch of different programs. And so what's interesting is, there are a lot of people who are deeply invested in the programs it pays for. There are also a lot of people who think very legitimately, gee, this is a huge tax on something, and all of this money is being imposed and so forth. And so there's a question before Congress. How do you fund these programs, and can you do it in a way where you're not excessively taxing a particular set of users? In this case, traditional, telephone or telephone users. And so there was specifically and so that's all going on as a set of policy questions. And there was specifically a set of litigation that started actually as a series of lawsuits in different jurisdictions, and boiled up to a Supreme Court case. And this was called Consumers Research, versus the FCC. And basically the people who wanted no change to USF won, but there was also a dissenting agreement, and there's sort of follow-on litigation. And so what's interesting is what it did primarily was it challenged what's called the non-delegation theory. So it was sort of asking, can the way that a lot of these programs are set, or the USF program in particular is set up under the FCC, where it's administered by USAC, and sort of who imposes all the controls. There's sort of a theory of law that's being played out here, and there are participants in this litigation who actually care about the legal theory more than the outcome. So it's a really interesting mixture of stuff. So the Supreme Court piece was resolved, but there's also was a dissenting opinion by Gorsuch, which is called Footnote 9, and that sort of has a life of its own. And so anyway, this was an interesting discussion that was a webinar, and the recording is going to be available, but it just gives some dimensionality to all of this. And it looks like it'll continue to play out, although most of the substantive things are resolved. But it's part of a much broader dialogue around USF, and how it gets funded, and other issues. So this, for anyone who's interested in that, it's an in-depth, interesting discussion. And then a third topic, and this is sort of less laser focused on telecom, but also there is a big piece of litigation going on right now between Elon Musk and OpenAI, where he has basically sued OpenAI, claiming that they were originally a not for profit, and had become a for profit, and that there was and that was inappropriate and wanting to get their leadership thrown out. And it's interesting just because it is so consequential to artificial intelligence and sort of the how AI is evolving in the U.S. And it's being it's in the courts right now. It includes Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, who's the president of OpenAI, Siobhan Zillis, who's was on the board of OpenAI and when Neuralink, and is the mother of four of Elon's children. So there's a lot of personal dimension that gets in there. And then Satya Nadella of Microsoft. So this is all sort of playing out right now. And I think it's something that a lot of observers don't give it a modest, a relative, not a high probability of success, but it's something that's stirring up a lot of questions and capturing a lot of oxygen right now in the media. So that's going on, and then sort of tangentially related to that, there's a bunch of things on sort of capital markets that are playing out. SpaceX is planning its IPO, and it's supposed to happen in June, and they've also filed their S1. And what an S1 is, when you've got a company that's about to do their initial public offering, it's a required document that you file, and it's confidential for a while, and then it becomes public. And so what's interesting is the SpaceX S1 is still confidential, but it was sort of leaked to Reuters, and Reuters has written an article on it. And what's really interesting about it is it includes a discussion of Elon Musk's compensation plan. And usually comp plans, have a what a business is expected to do, and then in increments a little bit more. In this case, it requires SpaceX to grow to $7.5 trillion in valuation, which is bigger than any entity that exists today. But that's okay. And then also to put 1 million people on Mars, which is just absolutely astounding. And according to the leaked documents, if they fail to do that, then Elon Musk's compensation shrinks to just a very like $60,000 salary or something. That's it. And so it's a very, I mean, this is just what, to me, it's a head scratcher, but also it talks about I mean, it's just the scope of ambition here is huge. And then related to that, we have several other IPOs. So you have SpaceX, Anthropic, and OpenAI all expected to IPO. And what's interesting about that is there's just so much valuation that's going to be dropped onto capital markets. Is It's almost certain to be disruptive to markets, and there's also a big discussion with indices like the S&P 500 and QQQ and others. How quickly they'll integrate that into their mixes. And so, it used to be that there was a waiting period of a year, and companies needed to be profitable and so forth. And so a lot of that's likely to be waived. So that's also, and so what's really interesting is with space, it's gone from people saying we don't believe it, it's not going to exist, to now it does exist and is being rapidly deployed in areas where satellite makes sense, but also aggressively beyond that. And then what's coming up is this will be so have such an impact on capital markets that basically anyone who has any stock market investment is going to be an owner of these companies. And so to me, that's just an enormous shift. So anyway, those were the few things that I've seen on the radar. And I've got some links I'll drop into the chat for further reading in each of these or in most of these.
Okay. Anything else, Randy?
Nope.
That's it, huh? Is that all?
Uh, and Henry, I don't know if I'm sure you follow some of this stuff pretty closely.
Me, I read some of these. You brought up a couple new things that I hadn't heard about. So yeah, that's interesting, Randy. Thank you for giving that overview.
Randy Mark Goldstein.
Oh yeah. Hey, Mark. Yeah.
International Research Center and chair of Arizona Telecom and Information Council. So to the lawsuit with OpenAI and Elon Musk, it should be mentioned that he was an original founder with Altman of that, and at some point got dis disgusted and walked away from it and then started his own competing yet commercial entity. And that's in part core, to the lawsuit. And so there's been all sorts of interesting testimony of these, captains of industry in the courtroom, that and they're being aggressively questioned by counsel in ways that they seem to be finding somewhat uncomfortable and unfamiliar to their standing in the world. So just a bit of color on that lawsuit. And then the FCC did just uh, loosen standards allowing higher satellite, low Earth orbit satellite spectrum use in several bands, and that, according to all the petitioners for that, will allow for uh, higher speed and better coverage from LEO satellites in broadband. Randy, do you have anything else on that one, or I don't think
Oh
we
yeah,
have.
no, that's a great. Those are great points, Mark. And the one thing that jumps out to me is I've seen in articles now people quantifying the effect of these changes, which is like a factor of eight. So it's not a 10% change; it's a 800% change, which is
Right.
completely to be expected when you liberalize rules that are that consequential.
And then Randy mentioned that the FCC was going to be investigating data collection processes and accuracies. One of the underlying currents is to make it easier for providers to submit that data, as well as another underlying current is to make that data better. If any of you remember, in the last cycle, the 2010 and 2014, we were measuring by census blocks, which were really rough approximations. Now we're down to the household level, but there's still, as Randy, a practitioner in this data, as Broadband Toolkit well knows, lots of anomalies and erroneous potential and realities in that data that, hopefully this is kind of a third wave that will come out of that for being more accurate and less burdensome. And then there was a court decision. Let me bring up Benton. Uh, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated the FCC's rules prohibiting digital discrimination in broadband access. Now, this was required by the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, under which BEAD and many other things are funded. Um, so, just to quote here from Benton, the ruling of the court simultaneously removes regulatory obligations that broadband providers, contractors, landlords, and other entities have been subject to. They're now all vacated. So the ruling affects every stakeholder in the broadband ecosystem, consumers who believed the rules protected them, broadband providers who challenged them, state broadband officials implementing BEAD programs, digital equity practitioners whose advocacy initially shaped those rules, and the FCC. So the FCC now has no active anti-discrimination framework in place and is now under order to start the rulemaking process all over. So um, that one I think is actually kind of a biggie too. That's going to lead to a lot of uh, hearings and flux and who knows what, getting back to FCC digital discrimination rules that can survive post the Court of Appeals rejection of their existing rules.
I'm not sure what
Yeah.
you mean by digital discrimination there. What is that?
There are rules that say that providers cannot discriminate against users, and those rules uh, have been rejected. They've been active since shortly after BEAD was authorized, and those rules have now been laid aside, and there are no current digital discrimination rules for the BEAD and other programs currently. So you could act with impunity in their absence to discriminate without perhaps a full legal liability because the rules are not in place.
Discrimination in terms of you're saying they wouldn't serve certain types of users for some unknown reason?
Sure, certain areas, redlining
Well,
sure.
And and I guess it's maybe an interesting footnote on that. At least my impression, Mark, is just that it's something that they put these rules in place, but no ISP. There's been pretty much no history of ISPs discriminating, and it's kind of like, why would you do this?
Right.
And so that's part of it too. Is it was viewed as sort of an ideological overreach that was unnecessary, and suddenly ISPs need to look over their shoulder and say, and even things like, are they covering all the parts of the community that are check all the diversity boxes and so forth. And so I think it
Mhm.
was sort of a regulatory overreach was part of what was behind that.
And Erin did just put a link in the chat. Thank you for the Benton coverage of that I was just quoting and abstracting from. So let's see. The rule had six core features: theories of liability, broad coverage, burden shifting, um, enforcement authority, complaint procedures, and a safe harbor set of provisions. But I'm not an expert in that law, but I believe that's kind of a biggie that has now happened.
Okay. Osa, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I was just kind of understanding. Do people not understand why that law in the first place came about? I mean, the concept of a digital divide, if you look at it throughout racial lines or socioeconomic lines, it's not, you don't necessarily have to have an intent to discriminate. Your practice and how you
Right.
apply can just lead to natural discrimination by default. So that's kind of what the crust of the law is. And usually when you look at the digital divide, which we all kind of like are part of, you kind of see there's a social, economic, and racial component to it. So there is digital discrimination. It's not like it isn't a made up thing. It kind of does exist just by the concept of the fact that we have a digital divide.
And part of the I guess part of the concept here though is because ISPs are for-profit entities, are they, like, if you take this ideology to the extreme, you would require them to build in areas where they're going to lose money, or so that's where it gets kind of messy, I think, from an ISP's perspective. And
Yeah.
also just that most, like, 99.9% of ISPs have acted in very good faith, and so that's sort of the pushback against this kind of stuff. But yeah.
And
Yeah.
But certainly there's a public
sorry.
policy goal of having everyone well covered. And so part of it is, do you do that through this kind of rule, or do you do that through federal funding or other sources? And so I think it's more the means rather than the goal.
Yeah.
Right, but when the access lines line up completely on top of historical redlining with like
Mhm.
housing availability and all of that, I mean, that's a
Exactly.
big deal.
And
Yeah, we've seen that here in South Texas, and then especially in like the Colonias and the Rio Grande Valley down south area with particular things. And so, like, yes, while generally speaking, the ISPs have um, been decent about some of that. Part of that is because they're required to, but also, frankly, just with everything that is gone on, removing certain other protection points across the board on XYZ other facets of things, we have some of the protections in there to ensure that something doesn't happen because it's mandated that there be certain protection points. And so while Like I get that, corporations are trying to, make the most and do the things and yada yada. That oftentimes comes at the, you know, underperforming or, taking advantage of particular things in low income areas, which 9 times out of 10 will overlap with different minority areas. And so that's where, if we have a removal on that, that would be concerning for me, because if they're doing all the things that they're supposed to do and they're, fully complying with all of those points, then there shouldn't be a problem in my mind. But I would be concerned that there could be removal of things in certain areas, or like, oh, well, no, it costs us too much money here and we don't have to comply with XYZ. So now we're pulling out of particular areas. That would be a concern.
So this is consistent with this administration's, June 2025
Definitely.
guidance significantly reformed from the original, and their actions since to generally loosen environmental and permitting uh, process restrictions so that they can be accelerated. Workforce discrimination rules and guidance have been softened or eliminated, all sorts of things. So I will just give you one more bit from Benton, which is a quote from the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr. Another good win. Today, the Court of Appeals struck down the Biden FCC's digital equity rules, he called them. Those regulations would have required broadband providers and others to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, and other protected characteristics. Non-discrimination prevails. Carr, I had dissented from the Biden FCC's adoption of these unlawful rules in 2023. The new decision follows a Supreme Court decision last week, making clear that intentional discrimination is unlawful. So that's where they are. Then one other interesting matter before the Supreme Court is a case relative to the uh, prescribing of and mailing of abortion drugs. And it actually takes on a telehealth perspective in that it would prohibit the tele-prescribing of abortion drugs, as well as potentially their mailing over state lines. So it is a telehealth impact in that regard. Now, if I remember correctly, Arizona's original telehealth enabling legislation and funding did prohibit abortion services, and I don't know if that stayed in place, but at the state level, at one point in Arizona, that was specifically prohibited from a telehealth application basis. But this Supreme Court decision would be broader and nationwide, uh, and a chink in telehealth capabilities if it rules against that. It's uncertain, of course, where this court will go.
Dave, you got a question or comment?
Yeah, yes, Steve. It's actually just more kind of a personal history. Ben, there's nothing new about some of these struggles, and it's going to be a lot more difficult to do the right thing than what it appears on the surface. So, in my recent experience, going back 7, 8 years ago now, what I can tell you firsthand is the worst broadband that I experienced in my travels is in Malibu, California. So literally right along the PCH, I was able to stay in a home there for about a week as a guest. That is grossly underserved. I mean, terrible, terrible DSL on some of the most expensive property. So there, it's more about easement and access, and some of the people, every inch of the land there is spoken for. So I was amazed by that. But circumstantially, you would not expect that because this is a row of homes of people that could, they can afford to buy entire telecommunications companies. And satellite was kind of just getting started. This was probably 7, 8 years ago that I was there. But I really was struck by dead zones and that correlation to wealth. It's not always as easy. But in my time in the mountains in Colorado, in Vail and Aspen, I had spectacular broadband, well ahead of what I have here. Really just based on the local politics. And I think, one of the presenters last week, we were talking this, I had a great deal of experience with this going back with the tribes. That's going to be a mixed bag. We have to be very, very careful in asking the people, and you're going to find divisions on the tribes. You're going to find a substantial number of people that simply do not want the infrastructure. There are still a fair number of people here in Arizona that are still living in hogans with no electricity, no plumbing, no access, and that is the way they want it. So, this is a question that goes back, decades. In my time in the business, and it's clear as mud, and I don't expect anything much clearer is going to come out of this because we're recycling some of these same old ideas. When I started, the fairness doctrine was still in place. Then it was not there. I was responsible for 2 transmitters, which held me to a completely different standard than other channels that were cablecasters. My mandate was to operate in the public interest, which is a standard that I don't know. It's kind of the fairness doctrine. I had to keep public files. Any of you, if you objected to something that was broadcast, any of you could write a letter, and that has to be part of the public file. And anybody can examine the public file of a broadcast station anytime they want. You have to have a certain amount of programming suitable for children. It's a very complicated thing to navigate. So FCC rulemaking, I think if anybody's expecting that there'll ever be a whole lot of clarity on it, I wouldn't expect a whole lot there. Because if I was hit with, there was no threshold. So if someone objected to program that we ran, if it was 1 or 3 or 5, do you react? If it's 5,000, you're pretty much compelled to do something. Then if the FCC gets involved, then you have to justify that you've addressed those concerns adequately. But there's really no standard. So some of the recent stuff that I think is making the news, I think there are some folks that are a little confused about that. And I know a lot of people here are, because they'll compare what they see on CNN, and incidentally, Ted Turner just passed away, for those of you who haven't seen. So what they see on a cable versus what they're seeing on ABC, CBS, or NBC. So after some of the recent things that went out over the air, I guarantee you that a lot of these local stations are just getting inundated with complaints, formal complaints from viewers. They have to address that in some way. But you're still going to go in front of a hearing or some kind of a tribunal to decide whether you adequately addressed it. So for everybody that's kind of struggling to understand it, I don't expect a whole lot of clarity. I think everybody just kind of has to muddle through. My last thing is, for those that you didn't see it, Brendan Carr did a real long form, kind of informal interview. He was really very transparent a couple of weeks ago. I think you can still find it on the internet. So as far as FCC chairs go, he's more transparent than I've probably ever seen. They tended to be they'd go through the periods where the FCC would be a do-nothing organization that you couldn't get anything out of, and then all of a sudden they were active again. For anybody who's trying to deal with them, the one thing that worked for me, I needed a formal opinion on one issue, on content, on access channels, because we had local lawyers that were just kind of free-forming it and making up the rules. and I needed a definitive answer from the FCC. I couldn't get that directly from them. And the verbiage is clear as mud. Senator Kyle's office was kind enough to make the inquiry on my behalf. And not more than a couple of weeks later, I literally got a signed opinion from the chief of enforcement at the FCC. And he wasn't actually responding to me, he was responding to Senator Kyle. But that was one avenue that I found to be able to get some clarity if you're questioning this was through and John Kyle was a pretty senior senator at the time, so those were the kind of people that could get some straight answers from the FCC. But anyway, good luck to all of you, and I'm kind of enjoying having that part of my career in life behind me, because
in other news, the House has returned Reconnect funding to USDA's authorization, and that'll probably be about a $50 million program in this fiscal year. But also for those active in telehealth and distance learning, the cycle did open. USDA only in the last week, I think, opened the application window for the current funding. I think it's 27 million total in the distance learning and telemedicine grant program. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to that program. Applications are due by June 30th in that program, but that is an active telemedicine and distance learning grant opportunity. And then one more thing, sorry. There is still a bill to track BEAD progress, and that's to create kind of a federal dashboard that tracks projects, the number of homes actually connected, and gives good, deeper data on the progress of the 22 billion or so in BEAD deployment funding. I don't know that it will affect the non-deployment funding, but for the infrastructure side, I guess generally I would welcome such a dashboard that really gave you kind of real-time information on the progress of projects that were funded.
So Mark or Randy, there was at one point, and I kind of lost track of it, about the proposed requirements regarding AI activities in the states and how that would impact BEAD funding. Is that still a thing or not?
That's still a thing. It's been quiet. I expect that to flare up when NTIA actually announces guidance for the 21 or 22 billion in non-deployment funding. So there was and still stands an executive order from the president that says that states that have quote unquote onerous AI regulation will not be allowed to participate in the BLEED non-deployment funding. So that issue is still active. There were attempts in the budget bills a while back to include language like that regarding states overriding states' purview in the AI that didn't survive. But there is an executive order, and it'll be interesting to see when NTIA finally issues the non-deployment BEAD guidance, whether there's any elements of that executive order there, and whether we then start having challenges to that executive order as what many believe is an overreach.
Has there been any announcements on BEAD non-deployment funds program? Because it's way late in terms of what they promised.
Only that only from NTIA, Ariel Roth and Harold Ludnick, that it will be soon. But they've been saying soon since they passed the March 11th was a declared deadline to provide that. And all they can say since is soon.
And I think, Mark, didn't someone say sort of 60 days recently? So it's they're trying to bound it a little bit, but yeah, it's
Right.
not as as soon as people would
Yeah,
like.
I think there was a 30 to 60
Yeah.
day, a mention or something like that, Randy. Thank you. But, who trusts that based on their having missed the hard commitment of March 11th?
I'm kind of wondering about a reevaluation of a lot of federal spending programs with um, the fact that the Trump administration has had to refund all these import tariff revenues that they collected, which is, a huge amount of money. And then they're also having all the spending on the Iran war, that there may be some reevaluations of some of various federal spending programs coming um, from the administration because of all the new costs that they have that they didn't plan for.
Good point, Henry. In fact, there is a 70 some odd billion-dollar bill right now that would be incremental funding for ICE, Homeland Security, and up to $1 billion for security considerations in the White House ballroom, which was supposed to be completely
Yeah,
publicly, privately funded. Uh, and there's a big flare up on the news channels I watch about the $1 billion ask actually, and it says the money could be used for non-security purposes. So the ballroom that was to be 2 or 300 million, and fully publicly, privately funded, had reached 400 billion, but now there is actual legislation that does designate, if approved, $1 billion more towards that ballroom and a lot more money towards ICE and Homeland Security. And as you say, that's all on top of the cost of the war or incursion or excursion, as the president might say.
yeah. Well, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of new
Yes.
spending with, the import tariff revenues that they had to refund was 166 billion plus interest. And then they've got a defense budget, which is proposing 1.5 trillion in spending annually, which is 500 billion, over 500 billion more than what they were spending previously. I mean, I'm wondering whether they're going to start reevaluating various spending programs, and that may be part of the reason why these non-deployment funds programs not being, uh, announced. I'm just wondering if
Well, they
that's,
have made nothing but commitment verbally to that program since the early days when there was uh, fear that it'll be clawed back. So they have said time and again that that money will be spent. It's
yeah,
just
I
not.
know. I know. Just a
Yep.
new environment, new spending environment
Yep.
in the federal government that makes a variety of programs potentially uh,
Yeah, a variety of
secure.
programs are at risk. Social services and other uh, consumer-oriented programs are certainly at budgetary risk with these excesses occurring elsewhere.
And Mark, your one thing you mentioned that's really important is just the reconnect funding, because in theory, BEAD was supposed to be the be all end all that solved all problems, right?
Right.
And so the fact that reconnect and people love reconnect, and the fact that it's now there was an original USDA budget that didn't include it, and as it kind of went through committee or something, suddenly dollars appeared. So that's really exciting, and I think it's an acknowledgement that there's more work to be done too. So we'll see where that plays out, but that's and we all know
Yeah.
that there are holes that got missed by BEAD for a variety of reasons, and also Reconnect does it very rigorously. So that's sort of a good thing, I think, in many people's eyes.
I'm
Though
hoping,
that
Randy,
this round is much smaller at 50 million. I think the last round was more like 350 million across loans and grants that included Reconnect, but it is pared back. But it is still, you're right. Congress did not accept its exclusion from USDA's budget. They restored it against the USDA's proposed budget.
So I'm working on trying to get somebody from USDA who's willing to talk in public about what's happening with USDA and USDA
Sure, and
funding
there's
and so
Community
forth.
Connect. There's now, restoration of Reconnect, and there's the current telemedicine and distance learning grant program, which has been great. Sorry, Melanie Escher, I don't think is on today. That would be a program that her and her stakeholders widely avail themselves of.
So Dave, we're going to hold on for you for a second and want to go to our other guru on all this stuff. Mama, are you still there and have any things that you want to add?
Oh, yes, I am, and I'm no guru or pundit or whatever you may call it. Mark and Randy covered a whole lot of ground that was so important. Every one of the things that they said, was something that this group would be interested in. I just have a couple of things to add. One, before I forget, I'm putting the link for the annual E-rate survey. This is conducted by Funds for Learning every year. This is the 16th year that they're doing it. And they do have a voice in the federal government and with FCC and with Brendan Carr and his team. So those who avail of the E-rate funds, whether they are schools or libraries or from the service provider side, I think it would be good to take that survey and to express your opinion. Your voice is heard through this annual survey, and a lot of good things have come out of it over the years. So can't say too much about it, enough about it to say how important it is. Okay. The other thing that I think that I wanted to touch upon was yesterday we had Melanie Usher actually did have a telemedicine webinar, which was very, very interesting. I'll see if I can put that link. I hope it. Trying to see if it'll come up as a link. If it does, yes, it did. Okay, the training materials from that are available here. It was really, really interesting, not only just for people who are interested in telemedicine, but generally she covered, there were several speakers, okay. Melanie was one of them, and she spoke about effective communication and connection with relation to telemedicine, but it's applicable to anyone, whoever does any kind of online Zoom or webinar, any other webinar, on the protocols, on what should be followed, things like lighting, positioning of your computer, your laptop, so that the doctor, she was talking from the point of view of health, so that the doctor can see you and can evaluate, keep your doors closed, keep the sound off, all those kind of little things, but it's really a very good part of that webinar. It was only one part of a 6-part webinar. The other topics that they covered was telehealth law and policy and the changes in telehealth, including the funding that Mark spoke about. Talked about the cybersecurity. Michael Holcomb, who was on this team before Melanie joined. Michael Holcomb talked about telehealth privacy and cybersecurity and those kind of things. And then Krupinski, Dr. Krupinski actually spoke about building standards for telemedicine that could be replicated, whoever wanted to do this program. They also spoke about the role of AI in telehealth, tele-rehab, more than even just telehealth, but in the role of rehab, sending exercise equipment, small exercise equipment home, AI connected to the service provider so they can see really how many times you exercise, how often, how much time you spend on it. Uh, is it good enough for you or not so good enough? Real-time monitoring, real-time feedback, all those kind of things. And of course, for those who were the health services folks who were interested in it, the billing and reimbursements and how that works. So it was a complete picture. It was a good 3-hour webinar. You can catch it in bits if you like. You don't have to um, sit through the whole thing, but that link will give you the training material that you might find useful. The only other thing I think I would mention, another FCC Brendan Carr thing, is that they're trying to save the pennies while trying to build the ballroom. So they went after E-rate bidding process. Um, and in spite of a lot of dissent from everyone connected with it, they went ahead and passed the rule, the order to say that the bidding should all be done online on the portal, um, and everything has to be transparent. Not that we were against the transparency, not that there was a huge fraud and abuse. GAO themselves say that the fraud and abuse for the E-rate program is about 1.2% for averaged over the last 5 years. That's the study that GAO did. But still, they decided that they're going to go ahead with the bidding portal, and starting with 2028, they're going to do a pilot run from the next cycle, that's 2027, and make it mandatory from 2028. So back to you, Steve.
So Mala,
Mhm.
I know that Shelby had a webinar yesterday, or actually, I guess they've been having several.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you want to comment on those at all?
Yeah, I think Randy spoke about it, and that was the webinar on USF, on all first the legality of USAC delegation, FCC delegating its authority to USAC to do all of the work that it's doing, and it was struck down. It was raised by the Fifth Circuit, 11th Circuit, all those active circuits, went up all the way to the Supreme Court. It was turned down, but again, it's gone up. Every quarter, the consumer research keeps bringing this up because of the contribution factor that is decided by USAC. Again, it's decided by FCC. USAC only does the back office work for them and collects the data, does all of the nitty gritty work before it submits it to FCC, who finally decide what the contribution factor that has to be from the service provider end. So those are the two main issues: the legality of delegation and the contribution factor, and rationalizing the contribution factor, both of which are still under discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mala.
Mhm.
Dave, can you do quickly? I want to get to a couple other things before we run out of time here.
I'll defer to the other hand that's raised there, Steve, and then if you can get back to me, if you have time, that would be great. But I'll
Thank you,
defer.
Dave.
Yeah.
So, Osa, do you still have your hand up, or?
Yeah. I just want to ask a question actually for individuals on the call. Does anyone know what the Arizona state legislation is doing in regards to? I know the governor, and I just looking at it now, had a breakdown on their 2026 fiscal spending. But is there any traction in the governor, like in the state spending when it comes to building out or expanding Arizona's digital infrastructure, especially when it comes to the rural areas? And is that something that is being worked on or pushed on on the state side? I know a lot of it before, from my understanding, was focused from a lot of those spending came from the federal side. Is there a push to be done on the state side, or is it still does that seem like a lower priority for the state legislator?
Mark, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, interesting question. Arizona's never really put much money directly legislatively into infrastructure, considering the state with its 120 agencies an anchor tenant of commercial infrastructure. That said, there was significant money early in the pandemic, ARRA and CARE and whatever all those acronyms were, put into middle mile fiber, filling in ADOT's pattern between Nogales and Flagstaff. There were gaps and there was funding from those federal programs there, and further to extend fiber from Flagstaff to the California border along I-40. The really hanging project is to extend fiber uh, from Flagstaff to the New Mexico border. That's long been on the state's strategic roadmap, but unfunded. Um, but there's no kind of gestalt here that what California has done with $3 billion in deep middle mile project commitments is something that we would likely see in Arizona. So there is some potential that Arizona's 520 some odd, or so $1 million in the non-deployment funds, so that some of that could be applied to middle mile infrastructure projects, not under the initial definition, but under the pending expanded definition. Uh, but not really anything at the legislature to directly. There are big budget problems this year. ESA, education vouchers are big budget eaters approaching $1 billion, and we have real disagreement between the legislature and the governor on the budget, and the session's likely to be lengthy uh, and a bit cantankerous before it's over. But the short answer is I don't see legislative allocations anywhere on the horizon for middle mile, though some opportunity with the broadband office may exist from the non-deployment funds.
Okay.
One
So
more
Lucy,
fiber bit of news is that there have always been two major cellular tower owners, Crown Castle and American Tower. They both have significant fiber assets. Zayo just bought all of Crown Castle's 90,000 miles of fiber, leaving the towers unclaimed for 4.25 billion, and that does include some strong Arizona southern roots that will enter Zayo's portfolio. So the interesting point on fiber is that you now have EX2, the management firm for ADOT and others fiber assets, and Zayo with very strong portfolios of fiber, and thus a two-stop opportunity for much, far from all, but much fiber access. Those have been rolled up over time. Zayo bought Lumen's fiber, now Crown Castle. EX2 has, I think, APS's fiber as well as the ADOT fiber and one other provider in their portfolio.
okay. Thanks, Mark. Lucy, you still online?
I am. Can you see
So we
me and
got
hear
a
me?
couple of quick announcements.
Woo. Well, yes, and they're already in chat. So basically, we have our May episode for My Healthy Broadband Live, and I'm kind of excited because it's cool how things work out. I was testing to see whether or not my dad or Kelly's mom would be interested in joining the roundtable because we're focusing on seniors. Now, Ryan Kawamoto was on this call. He's going to be our featured guest, and you probably remember him from OATS, the Older Adult Technology Services educating arm that's partnered with AARP. So he's going to be our featured guest today. And then we have Kelly and her mom who is Dr. Lee Chung. June, she's 81 and she's all about the power of connection. So I'm excited that we kind of have this, familial opportunity to bring that in. So that's at 2 o'clock. All the links are in the chat. Steve was unsure about your availability, so pop on with us if you can. If not, no worries. We've got it going. And then next week, we will have our first health and education task force meeting, getting back on track for the month of May. So all the links are in there, my email, my phone. And if anybody has any questions, let me know. And
Okay,
thank you, Mala and Aaron, for participating in our interactive comments. That's what we're trying to prove here, is that these are kind of community-facing live events, trying to engage public dialogue and talk about the importance of connectivity. So thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. So I mentioned this earlier, and I'm not sure if everybody was on at the time, but on the 28th of this month, there will be no AZBSN meeting. I will be on my way to Portland. So there won't be any meeting that week. And I'm not sure about the first week in June. Most likely I'll be able to do the meeting. I should be all settled and set up in our new location for a while. But and then probably we're going to be in Portland for about 3 months. So I'm probably going to go to every other week during that period. But I'll keep you all informed. I just wanted to let you know, and particularly since the summertime, I don't know that that's a big problem anyway. But anyway, I just wanted to let you all kind of know that was happening. Any other announcements that people have before we end for today? Yeah, Dave, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was really quickly kind of circling back to the funding. I suspect that the general feeling that a lot of money is going to disappear from these programs is real. I'm expecting a fairly protracted period of that, because you always want to take into account the sucking sound of dark projects. So if you look at that ballroom, it's probably what's under the ballroom that's not really being talked about publicly. I know that there are people talking about it, and so there very easily could be a fair amount of money going underground there for dark projects. And kind of in my history, in the Cheyenne Mountain complex was secret, then it wasn't, then it was mothballed for a while, and then mysteriously a bunch of money went into it again. They had actually leased the antennas out on Cheyenne Mountain out for private. So it in effect was the end of Cheyenne Mountain, and then it mysteriously, and what it's being used for now is probably more secret than it ever has been. But with the state of the world right now, I think there's going to be a lot of dark projects that do suck money from somewhere. So I wish I was more optimistic, but that does kind of seem to be the state of the world.
Don't we all wish we could be more optimistic? Okay, I'm going to stop recording, and if anybody has anything that they want to, any kibitzing that they want to do, you're more than welcome to stay online.